Yeah, I got it. I'm looking over it right now. I'm gonna have to get back to you. Sometimes in life you go looking for trouble. I have a feeling trouble is about to walk through my door. Vivian Cherie. She has an uncanny ability to make you do things you never want to.
I'm sorry to bother you, Jake. I just had no one else to turn to. You're so strong. No one backs down to you.
Flattery. It gets you nowhere.
Are you in?
When dealing with the difficult, this is by far the hardest of all of those people.
Well, good morning. My name is Grant, if we haven't met yet, and we are talking about those people. Today we're talking about manipulative people. And I just want to say right off the bat that manipulative people are the most dangerous, right? They're not just a difficult personality or a difficult person. They are very dangerous, and we're going to explain why that is. But it is really important that we not stick our head in the sand and ignore the fact that we all have people that are trying to take us in places that God may not want us to go. They are trying to take us in places that God doesn't want us to go. And so we have these people in our life, and we need to pay attention. I want to get started today by just talking about identifying manipulative person, because there's so many times where people are being manipulated. And I watch that happen. And personally, from my perspective, a manipulative person makes me angry. Of all these personalities we're going to talk about, we talked about overly needy last week. Next week we're talking about hypocrites, and the week after that we're talking about critical people. Of all the people, manipulative people make the hair on the back of my neck stand up, and I hate to watch it happen because they're easy to identify if you know the signs, and many of us have lived long enough to kind of figure out what a manipulative person looks like. But what makes me angry is their tricks, they actually work. Right? Somebody comes up and they manipulate me or attempt to manipulate me a lot of times, and I'll look at it and be like, who does this work on, right? Like, who falls for this? And yet I see it happen over and over again, and I watch people just be completely manipulated by others, and that makes me angry. So today, I want you to have kind of that same hostility towards manipulative people. So let's start with some signs of a manipulator. They're pretty obvious, right? First one's flattery. They will they will talk you up. When I was in college, I traveled with a music group called Impact Brass. I was the truck driver, okay? I was not a musician. We traveled with there, and there was these pretty girls that were in the band, and they were my age, and this wasn't weird. And anyway, we were traveling along, and they would come up and they would ask me to do things, and I would kind of, to be nice, I would do things, and then they'd come back and they would give me a big hug, and they'd say, "You're the bomb, G," right? And because they would do that, I found myself doing whatever they wanted. And here's the thing. I knew I was being played, but they were pretty, right? And so I want to take just a minute and talk to my young men in the room, right? So if you're a sixth grader, seventh, you're a teenager, in all seriousness, I want to give you a man talk, okay? This is, if your dad didn't give this to you or somebody else didn't tell you about this, here's what you need to know. That there are girls, okay, and they're pretty, they're really pretty, and you could, at this point in your life, you don't think there's anything more important than that, and you probably won't think that way for quite some time, and they're really pretty, and they want you to do things, and they will do whatever they need to do, and say whatever they need to say to try to control you, and you can't do it. Early on, you've got to really hear what I'm saying today. Do not let these young, beautiful women manipulate you, or you're going to end up being the world's biggest idiot and hating your life. I mean that, okay? So if you're a teenage boy in here, pay attention for the rest of this message, right? Second thing, flattery, guilt. They use guilt. Oh, and they'll just turn it, and actually they do the flattery thing, so they'll kind of like put that out there, and they'll talk you up, and they'll make you feel special, and nobody else listens to me, and then they'll just kind of dangle that out in front of you, and then they'll quit, and you're like, ooh, but I like those compliments, and I like that affirmation that you give me, and then they move towards guilt. So now you're chasing after the carrot, and all of a sudden they come back, and they're like, hey, you're not the person you're supposed to be. You don't measure up. There's a lot of things about you that are broken, And they try to lay this guilt on you to shape the direction of your life, right? In the normal world, a lot of times people do this, but in church circles, one of the common phrases of a manipulator, when I hear this, my radar goes up, and you call yourself a Christian. Right? Anybody ever have anything? I can't believe that you would call yourself a Christian, and that's what you would say to me, right? That's a sign of a manipulator. There's guilt coming your way. And one of the big questions we got to ask in this series, in this sermon, is why do the guilt have so much control over you? And finally, there's threats. They're using these as threats in your life, and it's just kind of a, hey, I'm going to hang up on you, or I'm going to leave. We're breaking up. I'm going away. They threaten you, and sometimes this is very, very bad, right? Sometimes this is really, really unhealthy and really dark when people in your life have threatened to harm you, threatened to take something away from you. And so you have these people in your life, and how many people right now would say, yep, I have a manipulator in my life, somebody that is trying to manipulate me. Maybe they're not being successful, but I've got a manipulator, yep. We all have those because they're everywhere, okay? And I want to get into some really important reasons on why that is so bad. It isn't just this little thing like, yeah, they're getting me to do things I don't really want to do, and we kind of give up some ground, right? And we kind of keep these manipulators at bay, but I want you to know it's deeper than that. It is really bad when you in any way give in to a manipulator. To do that, we're going to look at one of my favorite characters in the Bible. We're going to look at Samson. I love Samson because he is just such an anomaly. It's an interesting story. He's this big, strong guy that somehow has this power and this authority from God in his beautifully long hair, right? So he's got this long hair that he's been growing ever since he was a child. He's taken a Nazirite vow, and because of that, he does some incredible things. He kills 1,000 Philistines with the jawbone of a donkey. He picks up city gates and he moves them along. And a lot of the ancient stories of Hercules are thought to have actually come from the actual story of Samson. He's just this cool character in the Bible. But here's what you got to know. He is dumb as a stump, right? He is, if you read the story, he is one of the biggest morons in the Bible. He's just like, I lift things up and I put them down, right? That's Samson. He is a teenage kid that never grew up. And here's the story in Samson's life. Judges chapter 16, verse 4 says this: sometime later, Samson, he fell in love with a woman. Teenage boys in here. Are you really? Pay attention to what I'm saying. In the valley of Sorek, whose name was, you all know her name even if you've never read the Bible. Her name is Delilah. The rulers of the Philistines went to her and said, see if you can lure him into showing you the secret of his great strength and how we can overpower him so we may tie him up and subdue him. Each one of us will give you 1,100 shekels of silver. That is about $12,000 in today's market. These guys consider him the number one national threat to the Philistines. This one guy has killed more than the entire nation of Israel and all of their army have killed of any of the Philistines. They will give everything they have. Every one of the Philistines is going to pay Delilah big time. Verse 6. So Delilah said to Samson, tell me the secret of your great strength and how you can be tied up and subdued. Now, first of all, wouldn't a flag go up at this point? Right? Like, I don't know anybody that comes up to me and says, hey, could you tell me, like, your biggest flaw, right? I've got to trust you a lot to turn to you and say, here's my deepest, darkest flaw. And so he's in love, right? He's fallen in love. Okay, so anyway, Tell me the secret of your great strength. Verse 7, Samson answered her, if anyone ties me with 7 fresh bowstrings that I have not been dried, so these are wet bowstrings, just for fun. The King James Version, those are wet thongs, right? So I'll become as weak as any other man. Then the rulers of the Philistines brought her 7 fresh bowstrings that had been dried, and she tied him with them. With men hidden in the room, she called to him, Samson, the Philistines are upon you. But he snapped the bowstrings as easily as a piece of string snaps when it comes close to a flame. So the secret of his strength was not discovered, right? And so actually I'm kind of on Samson's page right here. He tested her. That's good. He's like, well, I'll tell her something that's not actually my strength and then see what she does with that information. And what did she do with that information? Something really horrible. She tried to have him enslaved and imprisoned to grind grain for the rest of his life. And then this is what she says. Just check this out. Then Delilah said to Samson, you've made a fool of me, right? You lied to me. Come now, tell me how you can be tied. Right. Just think about this for just a second. I just want you to envision the scene. He's in the room, right? And all of a sudden the Philistines come on him and he throws them over. There's dead Philistines laying on the ground. And then he looks over at her and she goes, how dare you lie to me? Now, fellas, how many times have you gone into a discussion with your spouse or the person you love, and you were pretty sure that she's the one that had messed up this time, right? And then somehow, after you go into that conversation, you walk out of that conversation and somehow you apologized. I won't ask you to raise your hand because I want you to be able to watch football today, but this is not an uncommon scenario, right? She's the one that's in the wrong, and as a manipulator, Delilah says, how dare you? She uses guilt against him, and I have no idea why, but Samson buys it. This is where Samson becomes a moron, right? And so he looks back at her, and he's like, oh, I'm sorry, boo, right? And then he explains his problem. It says, verse 11, he said, if anyone ties me securely with new ropes. Now again, this is actually pretty smart. Let's test her again, right? If anyone ties me securely with new ropes that have never been used, I'll become as weak as any other man. So Delilah took new ropes and tied him with them. Apparently, he is an extremely deep sleeper. Then, with men hidden in the room, she called to him, Samson, the Philistines are upon you. But he snapped the ropes off his arms as if they were threads. And then again, he goes and he thrashes and he beats and he fights his way out. And it's this cool scene. And Delilah said to Samson, all this time, right? So now we have a record, okay? All this time you have been making a fool of me. Do you know how hard it is when people think of you as a fool? Right? And maybe he caved because she was crying. No, don't cry, don't cry. All this time you've been making a fool of me and lying to me. Tell me how you can be tied. And here's the real danger. He has identified twice that she is manipulative, that she will use whatever strategy she can. And I think to myself, well, why did he do it? Why did he keep playing this game? And there's some of you in here, I want you to ask that question. Why do you keep playing the game? Why do you keep this manipulative person in your life? And why do you keep playing this game? For Samson, it may have been just because he was in love. Right? He's in love with her. She's a horrible person, but he's in love with her. You gotta kill that thought in your life. Tell me how you can be tied. He replied, If you weave the 7 braids of my head into the fabric on the loom and tighten them with a pin, I'll become as weak as any other man. So he was dumb, but he was creative, right? And he's like, I'll become as weak as any other man. So while he was sleeping, Delilah took the 7 braids of his head, wove them into the fabric, and tightened it with a pin. Again, she called to him, Samson, the Philistines are upon you. He awoke from his sleep and pulled up the pin from the loom with the fabric, and again he thrashes and beats and kills. And then she said to him, how can you say that you love me when you won't confide in me? This is the 3rd time you have made a fool of me and haven't told me the secret of your great strength. And so there's guilt involved here, and there's great strength, there's flattery involved, and then she comes with kind of her last move. With such nagging, she prodded him day after day until he was sick to death of it. I just want to quote the King James on this one. I don't usually recommend the old King Jimmy, but I want to give you this in the King James. When she pressed him daily with her words and urged him so that his soul was vexed unto death. Again, I won't ask you to raise your hand, fellas, but anybody ever feel like that? Okay, so you're vexed unto death, okay? And she finally came after him, and so she bullied him. Right? The strongest man that has ever lived, right, has been bullied by this manipulative person. So that he, verse 17, told her everything. Why would you do that? Why would you ever take somebody that you know has lied to you, somebody you know that has tried to control you? Why would you ever trust them? Why would you ever tell them a secret? Why would you share any intimate part of your life at all? So he told her everything. No razor has ever been used on my head, and this is the straight truth, he said, because I have been a Nazirite dedicated to God from my mother's womb. See, here's what I think. I think he's trying to explain it to her. I think he's trying to say, listen, I'm not just strong because I'm strong. I'm strong because I've got this calling on my life. I'm strong because God has made this way, and he wants me to be this person. And he's trying to explain it logically to a manipulator. You ever been in that boat? You're like, well, maybe if I could just explain it to them, and you give them your trust. I've been dedicated to God in my mother's womb. If my head were shaved, my strength would leave me, and I would become as weak as any other man. When Delilah saw that he had told her everything, right? And I'm like, boy, that sounds like the truth, she said. She sent word to the rulers of the Philistines, come back just once more. He's told me everything. So the rulers of the Philistines returned with silver in their hands. After putting him to sleep on her lap, she called for someone to shave off the 7 braids of his hair, and so began to subdue him. In the next verse, and his strength left him. Then she called, Samson, the Philistines are upon you. And this woman has robbed Samson of God's calling on his life. This woman has robbed Samson, and Samson has let this woman rob the calling that God has placed on his life. He awoke from his sleep and thought, I will go out as before and shake myself free, but he did not know that the Lord had left him. The Philistines seized him, gouged out his eyes, and took him down to Gaza. Binding him with bronze shackles, they set him to grinding grain in the prison. And because Samson continued to trust this known, proven manipulator, he lost God's power in his life. I hope you see how significant it is when we give our life and our control over to a manipulator. Because when you do that, you are essentially the same as worshiping an idol. because you are giving the will of your life and the direction of your life to somebody besides God. You are giving your worship in the wrong place. And so today I want it to be really, really clear. It's really important. It's, for many of you, it's the most important thing you'll hear all year long. You've got to draw a line when it comes to manipulators. So here's how you do that. First step is this. You treat a known manipulator, a Delilah, in your life. You treat a known manipulator in your life with extreme prejudice, okay? Don't pretend like a manipulator is just like every other people. Well, this person, they've got a problem, and this person over here's got a problem, and we're all just messed up people, and this person, well, they're a manipulator. Don't do that. Somebody that is genuinely, sincerely trying to control the direction of your life with guilt and fear and flattery, insincere flattery and threats, they're not just another person in your life. They are the most threatening person in your life because they could take away from you the calling that God has placed in your life, the direction of his life. Some of you can't even get back to that direction because a manipulator has taken you off course. When you find a proven manipulator, don't ever trust them again. Love them, care for them, but never in your life, ever, trust them again. I'll give you a great example of this, identifying them. At church, we play non-Christian music before and after service. I don't know what we were playing. We were playing like the Rolling Stones this morning, right? And you got to understand, we don't actually do that to be cool, even though it's fun. It's just not like, hey, let's do something cool, right? That's never why we do anything. Actually, the reason, the thought pattern behind it is because we know that if we've done our job right, there's going to be a lot of people come to church here that haven't ever been to church before, and they're not going to feel comfortable. And they're not going to know the songs that we sing, and throughout the whole service, they're not going to have a lot of familiarity. So we thought, well, let's put together just kind of a fun list of kind of the goofy songs, right? So we played New Kids on the Block last week, right? And Twisted Sister, and just like we just put together from all different generations. Let's just put together a goofy list of songs so at least they'll be able to identify that. Okay, I'm in church, I'm listening to Twisted Sister. Okay. All right, I feel comfortable here. Okay, so that's our whole thought pattern behind it. It's very intentional. Well, some people out there, and this is totally cool, and I hope you don't feel like I'm making you feel guilty in any way about this. Some of you have come up and said, why are we playing this, right? Because your church experiences is you just don't do that. So some of you have come very perfect, very good, very loving, you just executed this perfectly. You came up to me and said, hey, there's lots of good Christian music. Why don't we play that kind of music? So I explain it to you, right? So, and you're like, oh, okay, I'm on board with that. I can get that, sure. So that's great. That's a healthy conversation. About a year ago, we had a lady come into the church, and she pulled me aside after church, and she used all three tactics of a manipulator in about a minute and a half time period. She pulled me aside, and she was like, I love you. You're fantastic. You're wonderful. You may be the best preacher I've ever heard. Well, she didn't say that, but she said a lot of things that were really, really good. And then she turned and she went, but this is the devil's music that was playing, and I think it was 38 Special that was playing. And so I was like, okay, it's devil's music, so now she's trying to make me feel guilty, and she was like, and I'd like to think that you are a man of God, but if you're playing this kind of stuff, then it's obvious that you are not a man of God. And I'm like, okay, so now flattery, and then let's tear me down, right? So this is all in a minute and a half. This is like in one sentence almost, right? And then she says, and I'm not going to come back. So she threatened, right? So she's got flattery and guilt, and I'm not coming back unless you change this stuff. And immediately I was able to go, and as we all should, okay, this person is not like everybody else. This is not like the other healthy conversations I've had with people. This person isn't giving me some insight. This person is a manipulator. I could just pick it up, right? She was like, I've decided that this is my new church. Let's see if my dog collar fits on you, big guy, okay? She was just trying to figure it out. And with a person like that, I treated her much, much differently than I would treat any of the rest of you. I just stopped once it was identified, and I went, okay. I said, oh, well, I'm glad you liked the service today. I'm glad you enjoyed it. But this is who we are, and this is what we do. And you got to kind of like it, or you got to kind of leave it. And she went, what? Well, I don't think you should do it. And I was like, yeah, but that's who we are. And I'd love for you to come to church here, but you kind of got to love it or you kind of got to leave it. And she was like, and I'm like, I don't know who your previous pastor is, but I feel sorry for him. Anyway, she was just like, I don't know what to do now, right? Like, what happens now? Like, when do you do what I want you to do? I'm like, that doesn't ever happen, right? Okay. Send her away. She hadn't been back since. And that's super important, that we be able to identify manipulative people, and that's exactly how you treat them. You love them. You don't yell at them. You don't curse at them. You just say, no. Even if they make a really good point. Even if they make a really good point, that person isn't the person in your life anymore to make that point. I say that again because that's really important. Sometimes a manipulator will stumble onto a really good point. That person is no longer the person in your life that gets to make that point. You might have friends, you might have somebody else, they can bring up that topic, but if that person brings up that issue, it means nothing to you because you know the motives behind it. And the motives of a person's heart are everything. So, treat them with extreme prejudice. The next one is, and this is really the deeper stuff, and I don't even have, this is a whole message in and of itself, but I need you to go home. This is your homework. I need you to go home and I need you to think about this question. Ask the big question. And the question goes like this in Galatians. Galatians chapter 1, verse 10, Paul says this, am I trying to win the approval of human beings or of God? That's the root of everything, of every relationship that you've ever had. That's the big question. Or am I trying to please people? If I were still trying to please people, I would not be a servant of Christ. It doesn't work. It doesn't work to be a servant of people, to care and need your approval from people and to get approval from God. It doesn't work like this. And really the deepest issue in your life is you have this need to be approved. And I'm not just talking about those of you that are people pleasers. I'm talking about all of us across the board are born with this innate desire for approval, and we are looking for approval. And a lot of us will do whatever it takes. We will put whatever stupid boyfriend in our life in order to get that approval. We will put whatever stupid relationship or friend we need in our life to get that approval because we are looking for approval and we've got to have that approval and we are seeking it. Now, there's some of you out there that have gone, well, I don't need approval from people. And you've gone, I'm just shutting it off. I don't need it. I don't need approval from people. I am done with you. I'm done. Don't need anybody to approve me. Well, the problem with that is you can't just shut it off. That's kind of like saying, you know what? I'm not going to the bathroom anymore. It is a disgusting habit, and I am not going to the bathroom anymore. Right? That's not going to work. I mean, it might work for a little while, right? But eventually, sometime, you're going to be in public, and it's going to come at a time when you don't want it to, but you're going to go to the bathroom, okay? Your need for approval is something that God hardwired into you, and you will never be able to shut it off, and it will continue to change and set the trajectory of your life. And so here's your only other option. Either you can get it from any moron on the street. You can get it from a woman, you can get it from a man, you can get it from relationships, you can get it from that manipulative person in your life, or you can seek the approval of God. Here's the letter that each person in here needs to be able to write to a manipulator. It goes like this. Dear manipulator, first thing, I know who I am in God's sight. And maybe walking in here today, you're not confident of that. But if you were confident in that, I know who I am in God's sight, and that God, before the creation of time, He made me. He formed me together in my mother's womb, and eventually my God made a sacrifice that, no, Mr. Manipulator, you've never made. All the sacrifices you've ever made have strings attached, but God made the sacrifice of His only Son and died because He cares for me that much. If you believed that, if you knew that, and that's the only approval you would ever need, nobody could control you in any way. Dear manipulator, I know who I am in God's sight. Next one. I have done what my God has asked me to do. That you could wake up in the morning and say, my God has asked me to put my faith in Him. My God has asked me to trust in Him. My God has told me to turn from sin and turn to Him. My God has asked me to do a lot of things, and I have done this. I have been obedient. And when I mess up, I return to my God. I repent and I change my course. I have done what my God has asked me to do. Then when somebody comes up to you and says, hey, this is the devil's music, right? You'll be able to say, no, I'm really confident. I know what God has asked me to do. I've been obedient to Him, and your guilt, that doesn't really mean anything to me. And then the final one, God has approved me. Because I know who I am in God's sight, and because God loves me and cares for me, and because I have been obedient to Him, I know that, and I see this by faith, that my God approves of me, and your approval is absolutely not needed. That's the key to it all. Start growing and working in that. I want to make one last point in here. Lose control, because some of you are manipulators. Let me say it this way. We have all been manipulators, right? You ever say anything flattering to somebody to get them to do what you want them to do? You ever kind of make somebody feel a little bit guilty so they would do what you want them to do? We all at times can be those people, and here's what you need to do. You need to lose control. Because here's the thing, I'll just wrap this up real quick. You do not have permission to control somebody else's life. God has given divine authority. I don't know why He's done this. But He's given you control in your life to make the decisions in your life. But He has not given you permission to control somebody else's life. Do you know that's a step that God doesn't even do? If God wanted to control your life, He could turn you into a whole different person, because you at times are selfish, and you at times are not very patient, and you at times are not very loving, and you at times are not very wise. And if God wanted to control your life, He would just come in and He would just take control. But He lets you have control, and then we go and we try to control somebody else's life. We're going into a place that God won't even go. So again, I want you to ask those times in your life where you've been manipulated. I want you to just do, where you have been the manipulator. I just want you to do this. I just want you to say, I've only got control of my decisions. I'm not going to try to change the trajectory of my spouse's life. I'm not going to try to change the trajectory of people I work with, of people I'm around, my friends. Their decisions are their decisions, and all I have control of is my decisions. Let's pray. Father, I pray that